So you've just started learning Crusader Kings 3. After working your way through the tutorial and its many tooltips, you find yourself with a pretty decent grasp of all the different mechanics, all the rules, and all you need to do. While repeatedly pressing the I understand button, though you're pretty sure you don't, you come to a page like this. It says Succession Laws. You're pretty sure this page matters, and so you read it carefully and do what it says, pulling up the Realm tab and Succession page, and you're told to inspect this, so you do. There's nothing in particular you're told to inspect. You read it carefully and shrug, I guess. Nevertheless, you continue along through the tutorial, declaring war on your enemies as you're told to do. You've made Munster into a monster, and then you've unified all of Ireland into a kingdom. Gradually, you've got yourself a new beach house over in Wales, you've turned your attention on up to Scotland, and then, quite suddenly, you have died. That's a full life and an honest day's work. You smile, nod approvingly, and ready yourself to play as your first ruler's son, King Brian II. After clicking through, though, you gasp. Something's not right. The fields of green that previously cascaded across St. George's Channel are now reddish? There's a Kingdom of Wales, and it's ruled by your annoying kid brother? Dubbed, let's call him W. So, what is it that happened there? What irreconcilable differences broke up the Irish band? The answer is going to be Confederate Partition, but saying that doesn't really explain much at all. So, first, the basics. Confederate Partition is a succession rule in Crusader Kings 3. Rules of succession are inheritance protocols followed when a ruler dies in the game. Confederate Partition is similar to the Gavel-kind succession of CK2, though with one important addition. Stated as plainly as possible, Confederate Partition ensures that all eligible heirs get something of the prior ruler's realm, ideally something that is as good as what the player heir receives, and the game will create titles in order to ensure this happens. This form of inheritance is meant to ensure peace among the family, as everybody gets something. This peace isn't ensured when inheritance is instead determined solely by accidents of birth order. In Crusader Kings, who the eligible heirs are varies based on the realm's law of succession. They can include daughters, other members of the prior ruler's dynasty, or even any landed person anywhere in the realm. In the case of the tutorial start, the eligible heirs are just the sons of the king, as long as the king has some sons. Ireland has male preference succession, not male-only succession. Because our particular just deceased king had 2 sons, there are actually 2 eligible heirs. Sorry, ladies. And so each of those heirs got one of the king's king-level titles, an independent Kingdom of Ireland and an independent Kingdom of Wales. Now, with that said, I can imagine you saying, but wait, the prior king didn't have 2 kingdoms. He was only the King of Ireland. His titles here are entirely Wales-free. True enough, and this is the important modification from CK2's Gavel-kind to CK3's Confederate Partition. As I said a moment ago, Confederate Partition attempts to give all eligible heirs equally good titles to those held by the player heir. With only one kingdom, this isn't possible, so when our ruler died, the game checked to see if his realm could have included a title that would fix the problem. They'd give the second son here an equally good title to the first son. In our tutorial case, the Kingdom of Wales met that requirement. With its creation, both son number 1 and also son number 2 wind up as kings. Happy news for the family. If we magically resurrect the prior king and click into the Issues tab up here, we see that the Kingdom of Wales is one of the titles that could have been created the whole time, though at the cost of 500 gold right here. One advantage of title creation on succession via Confederate Partition is that it's free, though the player does lose out on the prestige gain, here 400 points, they would have gained by creating the title intentionally. So, to answer our first question, what happened? Confederate Partition created the Kingdom of Wales. This raises a second question. Why is it the Pipsqueak brother became independent? At this point, with the king still alive, Wales and Ireland are actually together under his rule. What exactly allowed that king to split off, unlike the various counties and duchies still inside of Ireland? To answer this question, we need to introduce a new heuristic, which I term the title pyramid. In Crusader Kings, all titles from the Holy Roman Emperor to the Mayor of Mumbai fall into a neat ordering system based on who can rule whom. The general story is this. Barons are ruled by counts, and counts are ruled by dukes, who are ruled by kings, who are in turn ruled by emperors. Every realm in the game follows this chart, though some of them use different terms. Barons are sometimes called mayors or bishops, counts can be earls and chieftains, dukes include jarls and emirs, kings sometimes despots and sultans, and emperors are also known as high kings and basileus. The title pyramid is absolute, so in this case, I guess the mayor should be ruled by the emperor almost certainly. Every county in the game is either ruled by someone of a higher title or it's independent. Every duchy in the game is ruled by someone of a higher title or it's independent, and so on. It's in this and so on that we find the answer to why our brother, the King of Wales, is independent of us, the King of Ireland. Kings are either ruled by someone of a higher tier or they're independent. A king cannot rule a king. With all that said, you now know the three conditions that caused an independent Wales: the succession law, the existence of more than one heir, and also that a king can't rule a king. With that understood, I want to address two further questions, one retrospective and one prospective. First, what could have been done to avoid an independent Kingdom of Wales? And second, where do we go from here? What should we do when some of our former territory has broken off from the main kingdom? If we again look at the final days of the last ruler's life, we can find a warning that the player heir will not be able to hold on to all of his father's realm. This warning can be found over in the Succession tab under the Realm page. Here we see this small red exclamation point. If we click on the drop down, we see that titles be lost on succession. In particular, you see right here, the Kingdom of Wales is showing up, with the mouse over as not created. This is your warning. Whether you want it or not, Wales is soon going to exist independently. So how do we stop it? We need to change either the succession law, our place in the title pyramid, or the kid brother. Changing any of these would resolve the difficulty, though correctly changing any of them may be a little bit tricky. First, the succession law. Confederate Partition is not the only way in which titles are handed out in CK3 on a ruler's death. If we click the change button right here next to succession law, we find many, but not all, of the game's succession laws. Ireland's current succession rule, Confederate Partition, is highlighted. To change the law, just select the law you prefer and, well, it's not so easy. To change the law, you have to resolve all of that red text before you can choose to change over to that law. And indeed, all of the laws here have 3 red text lines. In the case of moving to Partition, a law very similar to Confederate Partition, except the game does not create new titles, you need to first change your crown authority, then have all of your powerful vassals liking you, and finally have the hereditary rule innovation. Resolving the first of these 3 can be done with just 2 clicks. Really, you click here and then you click here. Though doing that by itself lowers all vassal opinions by 10 points, one gets a plus 10 vassal opinion by being in autonomous vassals. Having lost that 10 points means that more of your vassals may dislike you. You need to have all of them liking you in order to change the rules. This second criterion, having the powerful vassals like you, isn't so difficult. In this case, we only need to sway the one person here, the Earl Olaf Mac Ragnvald. So you just use a sway probably within a year or so, he'll be on your side. You can also send him a pile of cash to get him to join you. The third requirement, though, an innovation, is the most challenging. In this case, we see the Irish culture does not have hereditary rule innovation. We find that by going down to the culture page, we see that our learned king actually is already focused on bringing hereditary rule into his culture. Unfortunately, it's going to take 17 more years for him to discover hereditary rule. He's currently at age 73. It seems very likely indeed he will die before we're able to change over to a new succession law. It may seem then that we're stuck with Confederate Partition, but you may have heard me say just a moment ago that the succession page contains most, but not all, of the game's succession laws. Some cultures, including the tutorial's Irish one, have access to special succession laws. The decision page, reached by clicking the quill and ink button here, includes a decision, adopt special succession type. If one were to click this, the low cost of 300 prestige, you can go ahead and move from Confederate Partition to instead elective tanistry, a kind of succession in which the ruler and his vassals vote on who the single heir of all titles will be. The advantage here is obvious: no independent Wales. All the titles stay on just one character. The drawback, though, is that elections are really unpredictable. You might be able to play as your preferred character, or instead, the voters might choose some random half-brother, some crazy uncle. You might have to play as them, rather than as your carefully coddled firstborn. Tanistry, though, is not the only possible solution to all of our problems. The second condition that's leading to an independent king brother is that a king cannot rule a king. If we check the title pyramid again, we see that kings are only ruled by emperors. So if the player heir were to end up as an emperor, the other heir would still receive the Kingdom of Wales, but he'd be a dependent vassal rather than an independent ruler. Getting an empire, though, is easier said than done. The relevant empire for Ireland can be found by clicking the Kingdom of Ireland realm page there. Up top, we see this mighty dragon, the Empire of Britannia, which covers all of the islands up this way. It is absolutely huge, and it is thus far uncreated. If one were to become the Emperor of Britannia, that person would be able to rule over all kings of both Ireland and Wales together. While it's not impossible to go from a duchy to a massive empire in one ruler's life, it's very difficult to do so. The Empire page shows here that creation of the empire requires 73 de jure counties, de jure here meaning within the Empire Britannia itself, not off in France or the HRE or elsewhere. It needs to be on these islands. Also 1,000 gold and 2 titular kingdoms held on just one person. That's a tremendous number of counties to chew through in just one lifetime. Let's then think of empire creation as an excellent, though unfortunately ideal, solution. This then brings us to the final condition that brought about an independent Wales: 2 eligible heirs. If only Old Man Murcod had propagated less, then we wouldn't be in this unfortunate mess. As a player, one can keep a constant eye on the growing family and stop having children to avoid fractured successions. The Restraint perk, which is found over here in the Learning Tree, allows a player to freely choose celibacy, gaining them additional piety. This move guarantees no more legitimate children. It is possible that one's wife will still have children after one's celibacy. To ensure those kids don't wind up in a position to inherit, you'll have to have some difficult conversation with her. Also, it can be useful to have spare kids around in case something awful and unexpected happens to one's lead heir. If you're not interested in celibacy, say for roleplay reasons, you can also stop having children by removing a necessary condition of legitimate procreation. The spouse. Various right-click interactions on one's wife can stop the couple's having kids. Might I suggest requesting a divorce, or maybe plotting a murder? In this case, though, the damage has already been done. There are 2 eligible heirs, and no amount of well-intentioned spouse killing will undo that. You might already be ahead of me, though, and contemplating killing a kid. You monster! In fact, unless your ruler has the sadist trait, the game does not allow you to murder your kids directly. Instead, you can go over to the Knight page, find your adult children, and force them into battle. You can then send them as an army of one off to an unwinnable conflict. While it is possible to survive, you might also find yourself no longer needing to buy birthday gifts for 2 heirs. All that seems a bit silly though, and so there actually is a more roleplay appropriate way of resolving troubles with realm succession. It's a new mechanic in CK3. It's called Disinheritance. This is also a right-click interaction. You go to the character who you do not want to inherit, head down to the hostile section here. If you're playing as the dynasty head, the head of your family, you can go ahead and tell the person they'll never receive any titles at all, and they'll hate you for it. You're spending 300 prestige, 150 renown, they're going to be very, very angry. Happily though, this fury dies with the current ruler, so it's ideal to use as a deathbed interaction. It's not the new king's fault the old king was such a jerk and cut you right out of the will. All I would have said so far though is retrospective, useful for next playthrough, not for this one. Wishing that dear old dad had offed one's brother doesn't kill him in the here and now. So what can be done in this playthrough to reunite Ireland and Wales, to bring the Irish band back together? First off, you can do what dad didn't. You can kill brother here in the here and now. As he's an unmarried child, his primary heir is, surprise, you. If he were to die, all of his titles would immediately become your titles. Ta-da, back together. The downside, though, is that attempted murder doesn't make one very popular, especially with the target. If the murder scheme were to fail and one's involvement were to be known, there'd be a big opinion penalty. Worse, if the murder scheme were to succeed, everyone will then know the king as a kinslayer, one who's killed his family. There are no worse sins in the world of Crusader Kings. The more legitimate ways to reunite the 2 kingdoms are to work to create that empire we talked about a little ago, and then to eventually offer vassalization to the kid. At this point, because you're both kings, you can't do that, but once you're an emperor and he's a king, he might be willing to join your empire. The other way to go, though, is to instead press one's inherited claims through rule. Sons of a prior ruler have claims on all their father's land. In the case of the King of Ireland, that's a claim right there on the Kingdom of Wales. In the case of the King of Wales, that's a claim right there on the Kingdom of Ireland. They both have a reason to attack one another. So go ahead, declare war, raise an army, show your brother who the true King of Ireland is. Just be sure not to die in the process, unless you're wanting to play as him instead. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you again real soon.